The sun was bright that morning, but everything felt heavy, muted. I was driving toward the military base with my hands gripping the steering wheel, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. It was the same tired feeling I got before every family dinner, every holiday. Every command performance where my assigned role was to be a silent, smiling prop in the grand theater of my brother's life. My phone buzzed against the center console, a sharp, intrusive sound that cut through the quiet hum of the engine. I didn't even have to look. I already knew who it was. I let it buzz a second time before finally reaching for it. The message was from my father, a man who measured a person's worth in ways I had long ago given up trying to meet. My thumb hovered over the notification, a deep-seated instinct screaming at me not to open it. Not today. But I did. The words glowed on the screen. A perfect little grenade of casual cruelty. "Hope you're actually coming," it began. "Your brother is about to achieve something real. Maybe seeing him in uniform will finally give you the kick you need to get your life together. Don't be late. Something real." The two words echoed in the sudden silence of the car. It was as if my own life, my own career, the one they never once asked a single question about, was nothing more than a childish fantasy. This wasn't just another passive-aggressive jab during a holiday meal. This was the ultimate summary of their narrative. The final, bold-faced declaration that I was the placeholder son. The before picture, the directionless failure whose only remaining purpose was to applaud the real hero of the family. The internal ledger I kept, full of forgotten milestones and dismissed accomplishments, had just received its final crushing entry. I had to pull the car over. I just sat there on the shoulder of the highway, the engine humming softly, the world outside rushing past while mine had just ground to a halt. The initial sting, that hot flash of shame and anger, began to cool and recede. It left behind something else entirely, something hard, quiet, and sharp. It was the profound clarity that comes when you finally accept that you have been completely and utterly erased from your own family's story. In that moment, years of quiet hurt finally curdled into a cold, unshakable resolve. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. It was just the loudest echo of a story they had been writing for me my whole life. To understand the story they wrote for me, you have to understand the authors. First, there was my father, David, a man whose definition of success was forged in a boardroom and required a suit and tie. Anything outside of that, anything creative, unconventional, or self-directed, wasn't just different, it was lesser. Then there was my mother, Susan, a woman who truly believed she was the most caring person in the world. She mistook her son's constant need for bailouts as a sign of his deep love for her, and she saw my quiet independence not as strength, but as a cold and concerning detachment. They were the architects of our family's reality, and at the center of that reality, soaking up all the light, was my brother, Leo. He's the charismatic golden child who wore his charm like a shield, deflecting any and all consequences. To them, Leo's life was a thrilling drama of near misses and soaring potential, while mine was a boring black-and-white documentary they'd walked out of halfway through. They didn't just favor him, they invested in his failures more than they ever invested in my successes. I remember Leo's 21st birthday with perfect, painful clarity. He had just spectacularly flunked his third semester of college, a feat he somehow spun into a story about a tyrannical professor. To help him get back on his feet, my parents threw him a massive party. The backyard was filled with catering trays and relatives, all gathered to celebrate. What, exactly? His resilience? My father, raising a glass of expensive champagne, gave a booming speech about Leo's unlimited potential and his big heart. He spoke of second chances and fresh starts, his voice thick with pride. And then came the grand finale, my mother leading a blindfolded Leo out to the driveway. There it was, a brand new cherry-red sports car, complete with a ridiculous, oversized bow on the hood. Leo's jaw dropped in performative shock before breaking into a wide, triumphant grin. As everyone applauded, I just stood there, watching. In that moment, I wasn't just seeing a car. The internal ledger in my mind began running the numbers. I saw the reliable used car I was denied because money was tight. I saw the community college textbooks I had to buy myself, the busted laptop I worked overtime to replace, the guitar lessons I wanted that were deemed an unnecessary expense. It was a decade of their frugality, their lectures on responsibility, all exposed as a lie by the blinding glare of that sports car's paint job. Now, contrast that with my 20th birthday a year earlier. It was a much quieter affair. I had spent 6 months working 2 grueling jobs, one waiting tables, the other stocking shelves overnight. I did it because I had a plan. After realizing the business degree my father had pushed on me felt like a cage, I found my passion in aviation. I was saving every penny for flight school. I had researched everything, created a budget, and I was almost there. I just needed a little help, a small loan to cover the final FAA certification fee. It was a fraction of what they would eventually spend on the sales tax for Leo's car. I didn't ask at a party. I asked my father quietly in his study, laying out my budget spreadsheets and my work schedules on his polished mahogany desk. I wasn't asking for a gift. I was presenting a business proposal to my father, the businessman. He glanced at my papers for less than a second, his expression a mask of bored indifference. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "A man makes his own way, son," he said, his voice flat and final. "We are not in the business of funding your expensive hobbies." Hobbies? That's what he called it. My dream, my meticulously planned future, the escape route I was carving out with my own 2 hands. It was just an expensive hobby. That was the moment the 2 narratives were permanently set in stone. When I dropped out of their preferred college program and enlisted in the military, it wasn't seen as a choice. To them, it was an admission of defeat. It confirmed their deepest beliefs about me. I couldn't hack it in the real world, so I was running away to play soldier. They told our relatives I was finding myself, a condescending euphemism for being utterly and hopelessly lost. They imagined my life as a sad montage of peeling potatoes and scrubbing floors, because that story fit. It made me the failure, which by contrast, made Leo's lack of achievement seem like he was just waiting for his moment. Their ignorance was a choice. Over the next 15 years, they never once asked for details. They never asked about my rank, my deployments, or my duties. They didn't want to know. It was easier to keep telling the story they'd written, the one about the responsible, invisible son who faded into the background, and the charismatic golden child who was always on the verge of greatness. Their false narrative became the official family history, a fiction they repeated so many times they started to believe it themselves. Sitting in my car, outside the gates of a world they knew nothing about, I realized they would never see me. So I decided to let my world speak for itself. My original plan for the day had been simple. I was going to wear civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt most likely. I would find a seat in the back of the auditorium, clap when everyone else clapped, and slip out before anyone could corner me for an awkward conversation. The goal was to be a ghost, to fulfill my familial obligation with the least amount of friction possible. But after my father's text, that plan evaporated. The mission was no longer keeping the peace. Peace was never really on the table. The new mission was clarity. I drove past the main barracks and pulled up to the distinguished visitors' quarters, a quiet, stately building reserved for high-ranking guests. The irony was a bitter pill. Here I was, a distinguished visitor in a world where I was an expert, yet in a few hours, I would be in the presence of my family, the one place on earth where I was considered an absolute failure. I went to my room and opened the closet. This wasn't about digging up old bank statements or angry emails. My receipts weren't printed on paper, they were stitched with thread and forged in metal. The process was methodical, almost a ritual. I laid my full-class dress uniform out on the bed. The dark blue jacket was perfectly pressed, the gold buttons gleaming under the hotel room lights. I ran my hand over the single, thick black stripe, running down the seam of the trousers, the mark of a general officer. Then, I took out the shoulder boards. I attached them slowly, deliberately, feeling the familiar weight. 4 silver stars on each shoulder, polished to a mirror shine. Each one was a receipt for a lifetime of responsibility they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Then came the story I wore on my chest. It was a silent language they had never bothered to learn, a colorful tapestry of my entire adult life. There was the silver star, a receipt for a day of gallantry and action that they would never hear about. The Legion of Merit, a receipt for decades of exceptional service. There were campaign ribbons from deserts and mountains and theaters of war they only ever saw on the nightly news. Each ribbon, each medal, was a line item on an invoice that had been 15 years overdue, an invoice that was about to be delivered. The plan was brutally simple. There would be no confrontation, no yelling, no satisfying "I told you so" speech. I would simply wear my life's work. I would find my family in the crowd, and I would let the truth of my existence hang in the air between us. I had the proof. I had the plan. All that was left was to choose the right moment to let their carefully constructed world collide with reality. Walking onto the parade ground felt like stepping into a different world. The air was electric, buzzing with the raw, unfiltered pride of hundreds of families. Freshly minted soldiers in crisp dress uniforms were being swarmed by tearful mothers and backslapping fathers. It was a sea of joy and celebration, and in the middle of it all, I spotted them. My family. They had formed a little circle around my brother Leo, who was beaming, soaking in their adoration like a sunflower tracking the sun. My mother was fixing his collar, my father was holding court with my uncle, and Leo was the undisputed king of his own small, perfect universe. I took a breath and began to walk. It wasn't a fast walk. It was deliberate, measured. With every step, I could feel the weight of the uniform, the history it carried. The 100-yard journey felt like a mile. They hadn't seen me yet. They were too absorbed in their celebration. Then, about 30 yards out, my mother's eyes flickered up and found me. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound confusion, her head tilting like a bird seeing something it couldn't classify. She nudged my father. He squinted in my direction, his eyes narrowing. A slow, deeply condescending smirk spread across his face. He leaned over to my uncle, and even from that distance, I could read the casual derision in his posture. I was just close enough to hear his words drift over the chatter. "Look at him," he chuckled. A dry, dismissive sound. Still playing dress-up after all these years. I stopped about 10 feet away from their little circle, saying nothing. The silence, from my end, was a question they didn't know how to answer. They all stared at me, their expressions a mix of pity and irritation. Leo, looking uncomfortable, turned his attention back to his drill sergeant, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite. He was a master sergeant, with a chest full of his own ribbons, a hardened, no-nonsense soldier who embodied the very authority my father so admired from a safe distance. The sergeant was clapping Leo on the shoulder, giving him some final words of encouragement, the proud mentor sending his student out into the world. And then, it happened. The master sergeant's eyes, while scanning the crowd, moved past me, then snapped back with the force of a physical recoil. His entire body went rigid. The friendly, congratulatory smile on his face vanished, instantly replaced by a mask of pure, instinctual and absolute respect. His posture, already ramrod straight, somehow became straighter. He stopped talking mid-sentence. Without a single glance at my brother, he shoved Leo firmly aside as if he were a coat rack. In one fluid, explosive motion, the master sergeant snapped his heels together and threw up the sharpest salute I had ever seen. His voice, a drill field bellow honed by decades of command, ripped through the celebratory atmosphere like a thunderclap. "General Grant, sir? An honor to have you, sir." A circle of silence expanded out from us as if a bomb had gone off. Every soldier within earshot, from new graduates to seasoned officers, turned and snapped to attention. The sound of a dozen sets of boots clicking against pavement echoed in the sudden quiet. The world had reoriented itself, and its new center was me. I watched my family as their reality was dismantled piece by piece in that deafening silence. My father's smirk didn't just fade, it collapsed. His mouth fell open, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. The man of endless lectures, the patriarch with an opinion on everything, was utterly, completely speechless. My mother's hands fluttered to her chest, her eyes darting between me and the saluting sergeant, trying to make sense of an equation her mind refused to solve. But the most satisfying sight was Leo. He stood there, forgotten, shoved to the side. He looked at his hero, the drill sergeant, then at me, the family failure. Then back at the sergeant. The cognitive dissonance was so total it was almost visible, like smoke pouring from his ears. His brain had crashed. The universe as he knew it, the one where he was the center and I was a distant, irrelevant moon, had just been inverted. He was nothing and I was everything. And in the ringing silence, I didn't feel anger or victory. I just felt quiet. For the first time, I was the one who got to walk away. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I simply returned the Master Sergeant's salute with a quiet nod, turned, and walked away. I didn't look back at the wreckage of their worldview. I didn't need to. The ringing silence that followed me was more satisfying than any argument I could have ever made. I got in my car and drove back to my quarters. The quiet hum of the engine a welcome replacement for the chaos. It was only later that night, as I was packing my bag to leave, that the expected explosion finally happened. It didn't happen in person, it happened on the tiny glowing screen of my phone. My phone lit up like a switchboard during a crisis. First came a dozen missed calls from my mother, one after another. Then the texts began to pour in, a frantic, incoherent flood of shock and accusation. My mother's messages were a torrent of bewildered questions. A general? We don't understand. Why would you hide something so important from your own mother? What did we do to deserve this secrecy? There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their role. Just a wounded sense of betrayal, as if my success was a personal attack on her. My father's texts were different. They were cold, angry, and laced with the same old condescension, now twisted by confusion. You made a complete spectacle at your brother's ceremony. You embarrassed this entire family with your theatrics. You will call me immediately and explain this. He still thought he was in charge, that he could demand an explanation for a reality he had refused to see. Then came a single sputtering text from Leo. What the hell was that? You think you're better than us now? I read them all, one by one, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt had finally scabbed over. All that was left was a distant, detached sense of pity for these people who were so trapped in the story they'd created that they couldn't see the truth even when it saluted them. I took a deep breath, and with a strange sense of peace, I blocked my mother's number. Then my father's. Then Leo's. The silence that followed was my final answer. A year has passed since that day. A year of blessed, uninterrupted quiet. At first, the silence was strange. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the next passive-aggressive text, or the guilt-inducing phone call that never came. It took months to unlearn the habit of bracing for impact. It took months to realize that I no longer had to perform, to justify, or to shrink myself to fit into their world. Freedom, I discovered, isn't a dramatic, cinematic moment. It's a slow, quiet process. It's the gradual untangling of knots you didn't even know were there. The slow exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding for your entire life. My life now is defined not by rank or accolades, but by quiet purpose. Last week, I sat in a small coffee shop off base with a young captain, a brilliant officer with a bright future who was struggling with the weight of command. We didn't talk about strategy or logistics. We talked about doubt, about the burden of making decisions that affect other people's lives, about how to be a leader without losing your humanity. I shared stories of my own mistakes, my own fears. In his eyes, I didn't see deference to a general. I saw the gratitude of a fellow traveler getting some advice from someone who had already walked the path. This is what matters. This is the work that feels real. My home is my sanctuary. It isn't a large or imposing place designed to impress people. Every object in it holds a story. On my wall hangs a framed hand-drawn map of a remote village, a gift from the elders after my unit helped rebuild their school. On a bookshelf sits a collection of challenge coins, not from top brass, but from the sergeants and specialists of units I served with, tokens of mutual respect earned in dirt and sweat. The pictures on my mantle aren't of the family I was born into, they're of my chosen family, a messy, laughing group of men and women at a barbecue, the people who know me for who I am, not who they needed me to be. My peace is found in the simple ritual of a quiet Saturday morning, a cup of black coffee in my hand, watching the sunrise without a trace of dread about what the day or a text message might bring. I heard from a cousin a few months ago. She told me, with a note of irony in her voice, that my parents now love to tell people about their son, the general. They use my rank like a social credential, a shiny new toy to show off to their friends. It's an empty boast, of course, since they haven't spoken a single word to me in over a year. She also mentioned that Leo is struggling. Stripped of his golden child status and without the constant cushion of my parents' validation, he's having a hard time finding his footing in a world that doesn't revolve around him. I listened to this news, and I felt the same distant pity as that night I blocked their numbers. Their power over me, my need for their approval. It's all gone. The ledger is closed. I spent my whole life waiting to be seen by people who refused to open their eyes. I learned that true honor isn't found in their recognition, but in the life you build in their absence. If you've ever had to become your own hero because the ones you were given failed you, share your story in the comments below. I see you.